Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Young Impact Leaders of India webinar series. Today we have two main panelists. We have Manju Menon, CEO of New Socia, talking to Ms. Akshima Ghate, who's the principal of RMI India. I would now officially open the webinar. Manju, please take over.
Thank you. Thank you, Ronsilla, for this introduction. I would like to begin with speaking a little bit about New Socia. We are an impact advisory and a sustainability design company, and we work with this dream that to enable a responsible society. And much of our efforts have been reaching out to different stakeholders to understand how impact is created. And we realize that our youth are highly capable and raring to create impact, a social impact. And during the student days, they engage in a lot of things, but they often gets limited in pursuing some of those dreams by getting to this rat race called as life. So, which is why we have conceptualized this Young Impact Leader series, which is an initiative by New Social Academy to bring to you the experiences of some young and inspirational leaders who've chosen their profession to create large scale social impact. And today, in one of these sessions, the first of its sessions, I'm pleased to welcome Akshima, who I personally know for the last 4 years, and as an individual who personally inspires me quite a lot. So let me take this opportunity to introduce our guests for today. So Akshima, is the director at RMI's India program, where she leads research, analysis, and partner engagement. She heralds several consultancy assignments with government at the national and subnational levels, putting the mobility in Indian cities on the clean, shared, people-centric path, which is the need of the hour. And in this engagement, she has been working with NITI Aayog. She has been working with Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and different state governments in issues related to electric mobility, shared mobility, freights, logistics, and has been part of several committees set up by the government in those domains. And she has, through the Urban Mobility Lab platform, which is an initiative by RMI, has been implementing a lot of transformative mobility solutions in various city governments, and she spearheads that initiative for RMI in India. And prior to RMI, Akshima was working as a senior fellow and associate director at Terry. And she has been leading a lot of policy research studies in her earlier function, especially in decarbonizing transport systems. And needless to say, she has published several policy briefs, articles, research papers, and reports, and has also been a contributing author to India Transport Report, Moving India to 2030 by the National Transport Development Policy Committee of Government of India. And you can imagine that so much work with government, of course. She is based of Delhi. So Akshima, warm welcome to this webinar. We are extremely thankful for taking out your time, and I know it's very, very precious time for you, especially this in the evening. So before so Akshima, thank you for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Manju. Thanks for the super kind words. Thank you. I'm excited to be here and talk to everybody.
Sure. Just before I get on to few questions that I have in mind for Akshima, I just want to say that we have people, especially students and young professionals, joining from several cities today with us, and post few questions that we have for Akshima. We will be opening up the session for the question and answer. So if you have some questions, you can register them in the Q&A box, which is available to you, and we will try to take them as much as possible towards the end of the discussion. So let's understand. Let's begin this chat with Akshima, which I'm personally very excited about. So Akshima, so you have a degree in planning from a very, very prestigious architecture and planning college in Delhi and India. And so how did you actually enter into sustainable transport domain from there?
Thanks again, Manju, and thanks to New Socia for hosting this. I'm wishing you all success in the coming days as you host more of this. So my journey essentially, from SPA to my current avatar, I would say, I did, as you said, bachelor's in planning. The focus of that entire degree and course is on urban planning, on urban issues, and transportation mobility is an integral component of that. I specialized later after my bachelor's in masters of specialized in environmental planning. And for sure, from an environmental perspective, transportation has the key externalities on our cities, whether it's pollution, whether it is, energy, consumption in the city, and its relative, impact on the economic output of the city. So definitely transport is a critical sector as far as, environmental issues are concerned. After passing out from college, I joined TERI. I joined the cities and transportation team there, and somehow opportunities came my way where there was a lot of work, there was a lot of focus on transportation, on mobility, and the need to make it more sustainable, not only from an environmental perspective but also from a social perspective, from an economic perspective. So somehow all the opportunities came my way in early stages of my career, and I kind of kept going deeper and deeper into transportation issues from the perspective of energy, environment, and climate change. And somehow, that trajectory for my career took kind of course from there.
We lost you. I think we lost you in between a bit.
Yeah. I also, I think, lost you there for a few seconds. I don't know where was I when the
Yeah,
connection.
so I think we're almost in the end saying that, yes.
Essentially, somehow all my early career opportunities, my projects at TERI, they were focused on policy work around sustainable transportation issues with specific focus on energy impacts of transportation sector, climate change impact of transportation sector, and essentially what options we have in Indian cities, in our country, to shift this to more sustainable and low carbon path.
Hi, Manju, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. One thing I understand is that your work entails, collaboration with several city government, state government, etc. That means essentially a lot of travel, a lot of meetings on a daily basis. What does a typical day look like for you, and how do you manage time for self?
Yeah, I think currently in the current lockdown, I would say a typical day is like for all of us the same, being on the screen, being on the phones. But in a pre-COVID era, the day was filled with meetings, whether it was it is internal meetings, strategizing, and reviewing our projects and work progress and all the other admin issues. But a substantial part of the day is on external meetings, ranging from meetings with government partners. As you said, we work very closely right now. I'm currently working very closely with some key ministries, NITI Aayog, some of the state and city governments. So work, a typical day would have a lot of engagement with everybody. In our sector, we have to be part of several conferences and workshops, as you would appreciate. So many of the days are gone into workshops and conferences, which I do value a lot now. From the perspective of the networking opportunity, knowing what other organizations are doing, what's which way research is going. So that's how a typical day is. And also I think a typical day is lost in traffic, and that's when I also question myself, having been worked in mobility for the last almost 14 years now, when will we solve this crisis? Yeah.
That's interesting. I also I'm interested to know a bit about this whole transportation as an industry, right? I mean, how easy or how is difficult it is to work in an industry like that?
Yeah. I think there are lots of nuances. When you say transportation sector, there's so much to it. first of all, the whole distinction between roads, railways, understanding, how all of that is working. Then the second element is essentially, there are so many institutions involved, whether it's on the industry side, large OEMs, auto industry. There is, stakeholders on that side. You have stakeholders on the government side, and most importantly, you're dealing here with consumers, citizens who are, making different mobility choices. So overall, transportation, is a complex subject. It's essentially, dominated by engineers, I would say, to some extent, some policymakers, who come from different backgrounds. So I think just an understanding of the sector, working in the sector is critical. It takes some years to understand the nuances, the politics, the sensitivities in this sector, and what is at stake, for us as an economy if we are headed into different directions. That's essentially, something that I've been focusing on for several years. At what is the pathway that our cities, our country should be adopting to follow more of a energy efficient, environment friendly, and low carbon path. So it's a complex sector to work in.
I can imagine that. I've been associated with the transport project for the last 3-4 years, and I've seen a little bit of that those 4 years. But I'm sure you've been there for a long time. I can imagine how complex it is to really engage with different kinds of stakeholders and make a point there. And that brings to the next question that I have, because uh, we see COVID impacting every sector, like every walks of life, and definitely it is impacting the transport sector. So, how do you think, what is the level of, what the scale of impact that it had on the transportation sector, and how do you think it will recover, and how much time it may probably take to recover from that?
Yeah, I think just from a transportation, and particularly if you look at it from a sustainability lens in transportation, it is, transportation sector is definitely going to get affected severely by COVID. You saw the polls, and that's really, I've been also in the process of trying to assess the impact by connecting with various stakeholders. One of the biggest impact is that, we're definitely going to see a reduction in transportation demand. While, it is good in some ways, it's definitely not good for several businesses, several startups, which have really, recently ventured into, different mobility services and, developing several mobility products. They have kind of, made their business models on a certain mobility demand projections. So I think all of that gets affected. There will be a need for rethinking and readjusting, what were the original, what was the original BAU thinking. So that gets affected. We will see an impact for sure in the short term in reduction in public transportation ridership. And that is significant when I look at it from a sustainability perspective, because what we've been wanting is that an increased share of non-motorized transportation, an increased share of public transportation, an increased share of clean modes like electric vehicles. So all of this gets affected. People will choose to, if possible, not use public transportation. There will be an increased leaning to use more private modes if people have them or people can afford to buy them. We can also expect a second-hand market for personal vehicles to grow, because there will be a tendency to choose personal vehicles, because the whole perception of safety will be now attached to transportation decisions. Typically time and cost, you will see that time and cost is what will typically determine our choice of a transportation mode. I think in a post-COVID world, safety is something that will become an additional criteria, and that would lead to a lot of rethinking, whether it's public transportation agencies or the Olas, Uber, first mile, last mile providers, to rethink, how do we provide mobility services to people? How do we design now new vehicles, mobility products that can essentially, meet the expectations of the passengers, of goods movement in the post-COVID world? So we are in for a big transition, I would say, in for a big disruption, which will affect the business as usual.
Yeah. So I agree, with you, because as a part of one of the assignments that we've been doing, we have been working very closely with the rickshaw sector, and we realize that ensuring safety to the passengers becomes a very primary, what do you say, expectation, right? Basic expectation now. So the narrative of sustainability probably had an additional element of safety adding to it, which kind of changes the entire strategies that we've been doing, right? So that ways, I think I completely, I mean, I can reflect with you in terms of the relevance of safety that has suddenly come up in the post-COVID scenario, and how are our transport mobility service providers going to deal with that in giving more assurance to the passengers in terms of traveling safer and comfortable in the days to come. So I have because today in this particular webinar we have a lot of young professionals and students who have joined this particular session. So and several of them might be pursuing their engineering and other degrees, and might be making those choice of getting into maybe a kind of career in the transportation sector in the coming days, especially in the policy front. So what are some of the things that you would like to share with them? Because as a young leader with such a great career, what advice would you give them if they are interested in stepping into the sector and exploring their future there?
That's a very good question. I think most importantly, having definitely some foundational understanding of the sector is critical. So if you're coming from a background of engineering, architecture, planning, for sure you have some kind of exposure to an understanding of the sector. If you have more than a foundational understanding, the better it is for you. But I think what you choose in this, whether you're going into hardcore transportation planning, are you going to hardcore, urban planning, or you're getting into a think tank world where a lot of policy work is happening. I think it depends on so that knowledge kind of further gets developed on job. So the most important message I have for a lot of young professionals and people, students, is that while we study a lot and it helps us a lot, there is the significant amount of learning that happens on job. So I think just being open to that idea that when I go into a professional world, there is so much more for me to learn. I think first is very important, being open to that idea and being really aggressively keen to learn very quickly. Second thing is, I think, getting deeper into things. One thing I've realized, and I was fortunate that I could go deeper into subjects, whatever projects came my way, whether it was, competition issues in port sector, whether it was, how to improve bicycle infrastructure in Indian cities, how to increase public transit ridership, or doing some complex Excel-based modeling. I had the opportunity of go really deeper into those, issues and challenges and solving Excel problems or reading a lot. I think going deeper into a subject, becoming a master of that, gaining the right expertise is so critical, because you really want to become an expert. You don't want to know things superficially. So that's, second for me. And third and most important thing, I think when you are 2 to 3 years into your career, take an assessment of are you passionate about what you're doing? Maybe 3-4 years down the line, you must ask yourself that question. Do I enjoy what I do? And if you don't, then perhaps you're not in the right place, and you need to kind of rethink and question more, what you want to do. But if this is something that interests you, it motivates you every day to get to office, keep yourself working. I think then further choosing the right pathway there is critical. Which is the stream, because it's very important to learn different facets of the sector, of the problems that are there in the sector, gain an understanding of that. So I think super important to be passionate and like what you do. If this is the choice you're making in your career.
That's very that's very interesting, because yeah, I mean, the ability to go into the depth of your work in terms of establishing one as a expert in that field is needs a lot of patience and perseverance to be there, right? And I think the organization also makes a lot of choice there in terms of how do you how they give you opportunities, how you take up those opportunities, and really make up.
Yeah. Let me just add that I think organization, your colleagues, your mentors, and all of them play such a critical role in all these things. Whether it's about understanding a subject fully, getting motivated, enjoying what you're doing. So your whole culture in your office, it's all very important for sure.
True. So I have this curiosity in my mind, because I know you have been a part of several committees yourself. You've been designing policies, doing some very interesting research, which have been instrumental in creating policies. So for you, I mean, the last 14 years have been doing this work. What have been one of your, what do you say, the best moment, or what do you say, something that you think is the best thing that I have given so far, and I'm really proud of it. So what I know there are several of them, but maybe you can speak about one or two of them for the sake of the audiences here.
Yeah. So fortunately, thank God there have been a lot of those moments. And it's not only me who's done that work. It's always teamwork. I think that's another learning in your professional world, that you learn that it's always teams that work together towards successful big projects. My something that I'm really proud of is working on the Delhi electric vehicle policy. For last 1.5 years, I've been along with my team engaged with the Delhi government on helping them write that policy, design the contours of that policy, engage with stakeholders. Finally, that policy was approved in December 2019. So it was really a Christmas gift for the entire team when the policy was approved by the Delhi cabinet, and we felt really proud. We felt really content of 1.5 years of hard work has now it's translated into something which is notified in the Gazette. So it was a really proud moment, because I mean, as policy researchers, as people who are working in the think tank world, it matters a lot. We're supporting government on policy works to see that policy taking shape and getting approved by government. You enjoy that moment.
Yeah. And because and again, I think I'm thinking as a student right now. So I'm also wanting to understand, for someone who wants to pursue a policy research profile, right? Like, from where you have grown yourself to be what you are today, what are some of the skill sets that they need to earn as a part of their learning process, to qualify themselves to become a good policy researcher, or a yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't have degrees which will prepare master's students who are emerging out of masters for policy research. We do have some such courses outside India. We really don't have that kind of a focus. But if you are kind of conscious and making the choice that I'm going to enter into the think tank world, or organizations, NGOs that are largely working towards supporting and influencing policies, I think most importantly, I feel, of course, I said it earlier, knowledge of the subject that you're getting in, and also an understanding of the whole governance, institutional framework around that sector. So, which is transportation sector, for example. What are the major laws in the country that govern? What are the regulations that govern that sector? Who are the key players? Which are the ministries? I think just an orientation of that, and also kind of bringing yourself up to speed with the latest in that sector. What changes are taking place, which way R&D in industry is headed. I think getting yourself up to speed with all of that is important. And so I would say reading, having the being passionate about knowing the latest in that sector is important. A critical thing that for me is like, you should be super good at writing, and if you're not, try and improve that. I mean, all that we do at the end of the day is translate our thinking, our analysis into papers, into reports that are very clear on messaging, very clear on suggesting recommendations to government, to industry. So I think your writing skills have to be super sharp in terms of translating all of this thinking into actionable items, and that's what people would expect from you. And this writing is ranging from your ability to write a blog, an article, a really good referee journal paper, to a good report for a government client. So that is it. And most importantly, lastly, is the presentation and communication skills. I think those are also critical. So in our field, you will have to come out and speak to what you have researched and what you're suggesting. So presentation, communication skills become critical too.
That's very interesting and very insightful, Lakshma. And with that, I have some questions from the audiences today, and I would pick up this first question, which is related to what we were speaking about. What are the other alternative careers that the policy, other than policy making, can someone pursue in the sustainable mobility sector?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, I
Yeah.
didn't.
So what are some of the alternative careers other than policy making and research can someone pursue in the sustainable mobility sector?
Sure. Definitely there are consultancy that do really specialized transportation planning. That's one option, that you get into some such firms which are actually designing mobility and transportation plans for cities. That's one option. There is a lot of scope of now, in startup world. They are, startups around mobility services, around design of mobility products. There is a huge scope of opportunity now. We've seen, some 100 plus startups grow in the mobility sector alone in the last 3 4 years. So huge scope there. Of course, third option is the conventional industry, the auto industry. Being finding the right place for yourself if you're coming more from an engineering background. So I would pick those three, four. And of course, if you are coming from a transportation background or a similar background, you always have scope to be working with the city governments, the state governments, transportation departments, urban local bodies, planning authorities. So that will always be your option.
Okay, so we have another question here, where someone is asking that with this pandemic becoming where solidarity becomes a very big challenge, right? How do we bring back the focus on sustainability as a as a subject, because the focus has suddenly shifted to something different now? So what does that we need to do to bring it back to the focus now?
Yeah. I think there's, I can't answer it in one sentence, but really good question there. If I was a government, I had to ensure, as government, I am not letting go of the policy, the aggressive measures that I have taken up in the last 2 3 years. For example, to promote electric mobility, to give a big push to public transportation. I cannot let those get derailed because there is a more atmosphere of solidarity. Yes, definitely things will slow down. Policy makers will have to rethink, but definitely you kind of go back in time, but you have to find ways to come back at least at the 2020 levels, for sure. As industry, again, it's a tough call. Industry is suffering a lot. Startups are suffering a lot. There are huge revenue losses in this quarter that have happened. But again, what is the motivation? Ultimately, how am I as a business contributing to sustainability? I think if we cannot let that go in the short term or the medium term. So that has to drive. And fortunately, I've been talking to a lot of people, that thinking is not going. While we will expect a lot of slowing down, we will expect some amount of disruption in what we were seeing in terms of progress on sustainability and mobility. But we do expect things to bounce back, hopefully in 1 year.
So I think that coming from you is definitely a sign of positivity and hope. And I sincerely believe that we don't backtrack from whatever commitments that we have taken in terms of decarbonization and all of those, for which considerable efforts have already been put out there. Due to paucity of time, we may have to conclude this in another 2 minutes. But I'm extremely thankful to you, Akshima, for being here and having these interesting conversations. Especially, I'm very happy that we've been able to focus on few things like looking out for opportunities, going in depth into the subject of what we are looking at, and and taking responsibility, right, in terms of the leadership capabilities that we need to build up for, because sustainability is not something, not a short term goal. It needs continuous efforts from everybody's side. And I think that's the consistency with which you have been doing is has definitely led a lot of and created a lot of impact at different levels altogether. So I I'm very, very happy and thankful to you for being a part of this session. I'm sure I am always inspired by you, and every bit of the conversation that I have with you is enlightening for me. And I'm sure that a lot of people who are out there would be inspired by the kind of conversations that we had today. Unfortunately, we have not been able to answer all the questions that came today, but we would be attempting to answer to you all the questions that have come during this particular conversation. We may mail it back to you in consultation with Akshima, maybe in in the next few days. And with that, we would conclude our session today. Thank you very much, Akshima.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Manju. Thanks to your team for organizing this, and all the best for the future webinar and the series. I'm also, grateful to all the participants for joining and listening. Yeah, wishing you all the very best.